I'm Daniel, and I'm a product designer at Rangle. Thank you so much for coming out today. There you go. There's a slide just for everyone over here. Thank you. It's my first time doing a talk, so please bear with me. So, how do I get my notes on here? Sorry. They're not showing up. Sorry. I got him. Okay, we're all good. Okay, sorry about that. So, my name is Daniel. I love usability tests. Mainly because, number one, you get to test your product, and that's always great. You need to validate what you've created. Number two, you need to learn from your results. What failed, what passed in your scenarios. And number three, pretty much, you need to see those recommendations and implement a solution. Relay that info back to your teammates, and work with the team to actually implement. And when you've done all of that, you should feel extremely confident in what you've created because you've actually validated with end users. And so you're pretty much, you know your design is definitely bulletproof. You're really confident with it. And you know whether your product can sink or swim. So the big question is, well, why are we here? How do you incorporate usability tests within Agile? The answer is, there really is no single right way. Unfortunately. I know. Sorry, it's just not that easy. And there's several different factors. I'll just outline those factors right now. The first one being the sprint. Sprints are different in every single company. Different for possible projects, and that's why it's a big factor when you think about actually implementing usability tests within them. Feasibility is another thing to think about. There are many different moving parts when actually conducting usability tests. You have to think about participants. Who will the participants be? How you actually get participants to come over and participate. Your testing environment. Will you hold it within a lab? Will you have a boardroom? Do you need equipment? Do you need a GoPro? Stuff like that. There's also creating scenarios and questions for your users. And this just isn't the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more other things. And sometimes your time is just limited. And then the last one being the client. And this one usually stifles the reasoning for actually doing usability tests. We're grateful to have a lot of great clients here at Rangle that are really excited about it. But I'll go through a couple of different reasonings. It usually starts with them being a little worried about actually conducting a usability test. And that leads to fear. And fear leads to sometimes being irrational and just angry about actually conducting one. So let's just hold it right there. It's a part of our process here at Rangle to actually conduct usability tests. You want to actually build a successful product, and that's one way of actually doing it when you're putting it in front of end users. And the analogy I gave one of our old clients was that you wouldn't rebuild the wheelchair without putting a prototype in front of somebody who needs one. So why would you build a product and not actually put that product in front of end users? And another client we had actually wanted to conduct focus groups, and they did not want to do usability tests, and they were adamant. But I'll get into that later, and I promise you it's a happy ending. So let's just recap. We talked about sprints and how sprints are different within every company. That's why there really is no right way to actually, or right single way to actually incorporate usability tests within Agile. Feasibility. There's a lot of different moving parts when actually creating usability tests. And then you have clients. Clients are different within every project. You may have amazing clients that just want to adopt this. They want to actually make their product successful. They want to actually be a part of creating these usability tests and being there. And these are all common factors. So at Rangle, we have been incorporating usability tests in different ways. And I'm just going to go through a couple ways that we've incorporated and how that process has led to what we've been doing right now. So the very first, and I think a lot of us have been guilty of it, is that there's definitely no testing at all. This is the worst case scenario. We noticed that something was wrong here. You can only rely on your UX research so much when you're not validating in front of a user. And it's better to have users actually test your product and help actually validate your research. And building with assumptions is just scary. So we came to the end, or nearing the end of one of our projects, and we had the ability to actually conduct a usability test. And then we thought to ourselves, well, how do we do this? So we approached the client with it, and this is the same client, remember, client that wanted to do focus groups. And we told them, well, why did you want to do focus groups? And how are you actually going to conduct these focus groups? And they said, well, we're just going to have the application, and we're going to go around, and we're going to talk to people and ask them, well, do you like the application? And I said, well, what does that bring to the table? What solutions are you going to actually get from that? And they pretty much said that they didn't know. So they got on board that way, which was luckily for us. And with this project, like I said, we were near the end, which isn't ideal, but it was an ability to actually try something like this out. And so, like I said, how do we do this? We were very scared because there's so many different moving parts. We had to formulate a usability test plan. I just want to say that we were working with an enterprise client, and they wanted to see this. They need to talk to upper management. They need to show them what we were doing. So we had to formulate a massive usability test plan, talking about what metrics we're going to talk about and cover, whether that be subjective metrics like surveys, actual quantitative metrics like how long did it take to complete a task, was a task successful, was there critical errors, non-critical errors, all that jazz. We had to think about participants. Thankfully, the client actually wanted to help out and got us participants. The environment and equipment, where were we actually going to hold all this? We ended up using GoPros. We may not have needed GoPros, but we used them anyways because it was cool thought. A lot of cameras. And with that comes consent forms that we actually never used, but we spent time doing. And there was after-task questions. There was background questions, after-survey questions, scenario and task questions, which is pretty much your bread and butter and your focus. And then I had to sit there and review 7 hours of footage after I flew to Texas. Yes, we had to actually fly out to Texas and conduct these tests because the participants that they picked were in Texas. So we had 6 participants, an hour and a half each, roughly around 7 hours of footage, and I'll talk about why we only had 7 hours of footage, but I had to come back to Toronto and review those 7 hours of footage, and I'm sorry, Mike, because I probably fell asleep on my computer multiple times. It was ridiculous. And that wasn't the end of it. We had to create a 50-page usability test report for the client. And just thinking about that makes me cry. I mean, it was ridiculous. Here's all our research from that client, and that just isn't feasible. I mean, take it for what it is. It was too much time. We learned a lot, though. We learned a lot, and that's what I'm going to get into. We validated our product. We found issues that could have been fixed, or issues that we could have actually found out about early if we tested earlier. We noticed that we made some big assumptions. And with these results that we got, which were great, we were able to incorporate some fixes. And I just want to say the key word being some fixes. We were at the end of the project, and there's only so much that we could do. And that's why we had the 50-page report to hand off to the client so that their developers can take that on. So here's some pictures. I had a bigger beard there. Rest in peace to the beard. But we had, I was the facilitator and the observer, which we learned about that maybe I should bring somebody else along next time because it was a lot to handle. And that was our little GoPro setup on the iPhone. Here's another close look at the GoPro setup, which was amazing, but the GoPro kept on dying every 30 minutes. So that's something to think about. And after reviewing all that footage, we had this, which was amazing. I mean, we could actually see their inputs. We could actually see what they're saying. And we got a lot of great results from this. But it just wasn't feasible. We can't do this every sprint, or we can't even do this every 2 sprints or 3 sprints. It's just a lot of time. So let's just recap. First thing is we took a bloated approach. Documents on top of documents, which I've shown you here, it just isn't feasible. We flew out to Texas. We want to keep it local this time. And we tested late. This just happened to be the nature of the project and the time that we proposed testing. And we just weren't testing alongside development, something that isn't ideal. And when we actually got fixes that we wanted to make, we just didn't have time. But there's a lot of discovery here. We learned a lot. We learned actually how to conduct a very formal usability test. We learned what equipment didn't work. We learned what equipment did work. And just about why we shouldn't be testing late. There's always a learning outcome from all of this. And one thing that was really interesting was the general psychology of actually conducting tests. I mean, little things can actually, I guess you could say, fix a test when you actually help them. You shouldn't be helping them. Little words like saying, do you like this? You shouldn't be doing anything like that, which was great. And at the end of it, the client was so excited, and they learned from us as well. So round 2. This time, we were going to actually test early. We need to disarm assumptions and understand users' needs from the get-go. And another thing was that we need to keep it lightweight. I did not want to write another 50-page report again or review 7 hours of footage. Sorry. So this time, we only had a voice recording. We don't always need a camera, but this was something just to keep a record of the conversation. We used pen and pad for note-taking, which is great because we had quick feedback on paper and ready to relay back to the team. We wanted to keep it more candid this time than extremely formal. It's all up to preference in terms of that, but it was great. Made the actual users feel really comfortable. And then we implemented right afterwards. We took everything that we learned from those tests, and we brought it back to the team, and we implemented from that sprint. It was great. The solution was implemented immediately. We got results early, and we understood the user's needs from the get-go. And we improved our new concepts, and we disarmed old assumptions. And we were actually validating features alongside we were developing them. But we stopped testing. And this is not to say this project wasn't a success, because the project was a success. We were building an MVP for the client. But we could have continued testing alongside development, because that was amazing, because we were validating. We had confidence in what we were creating. So in this scenario, we actually tested early. We had a lightweight approach, which was great. This could be viable in a sprint. And like this time, we discovered a lot. Testing alongside development is possible. And we understood now from the past to the test prior that we understood when to test, where to test, how to test, and what do we even do with these results. So we knew that we need to test early and often. Often was the missing piece. And this was a no-brainer. But how do we actually incorporate it within our sprint cycle? At Rangle, we have 1-week sprints, which it could be demanding depending on the project. And how is it even feasible to have usability tests within a week? How do we keep it lightweight and be able to implement it within that cycle? So the next thing is, how do we actually keep it lightweight? First thing that we thought about was participants. How do we even get participants? That's a lot of time. Do we outsource it to another recruiter? Do we have somebody within our team getting participants? What we've had in the past was a client, and what we're doing right now, clients are actually helping us get these participants because they want to be part of the process. There's also equipment. Do you need a camera? Do you need a GoPro? Probably not, if you want to keep it very lightweight. Like I said before, it was a big problem for us when we had the GoPro because we were actually in and out. There was a lot of problems with it, with the battery dying, and that's why we only had 7 hours of footage at the end, and it was disrupting our tests. And where are you actually going to hold these tests? This time, we've actually kept it local, which is great. One big thing I want to advocate for is actually getting your teammates involved in the process. Don't work in a silo. Your team's helping you. Your team helping you keeps this more lightweight. That means having developers or BQAs, Scrum Masters, even the client. And I want to get back to what I said in the beginning about the client being worried about actually conducting tests. When we've had clients involved in the process, they're excited. They feel like it's their baby. So allow them to get involved. Allow them to see the scenarios that you're creating. Allow them to come along with you. But remember to actually, when they come along, to tell them which role that they have, whether that be like a silent observer or not. And you need to have viable stories to test. I'm going to get into this later. So once a week just wasn't feasible for us. And this is about stories of being viable to test. In our current project, we didn't have enough to test at the end of a week. We didn't have a viable flow. And we didn't have enough time to actually incorporate a solution. And what worked for us are buy and try weekly tests. I'm not even sure try weekly is even a word, but I'm just going to use it because it worked for us. We were able to have enough time to prepare ourselves. That means creating scenarios, having background questions and after task questions, and bringing somebody along with us to actually note take. We could actually implement on our off week, and we could bring back all these results to our team and get ready to implement and think about solutions. And so back to the question, how do we implement this into your sprint cycle at your workplace? And the truth is, it will be different in every company and project. We've explored several options, and we've learned a lot of different things. It's startup versus enterprise. Enterprise, there's a lot of things to worry about. Startup, there are also a lot of things to worry about. And just what that was like was a learning experience for us. We learned ways to work with our sprint and making our tests more feasible. And one big thing was working with our clients and not against our clients. Clients, like I said, love the process that we've worked with. And we haven't figured out the right way. Not that there may be a right way, but we're going to just continue to explore what is right for us. I just want to say that what plagued me before was that I could theorize for months. And Mike made a great point to me. It's like you can theorize months and months, but theory can really only take you so far. You just have to actually get out there and learn, because there are a lot of things to learn about actually conducting tests. Like I said, equipment problems, just the general psychology of conducting tests. And by the time you are ready to actually implement these tests, you'll be so comfortable and they'll be more meaningful. And I mean, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Some mistakes being like having your clients sit in and they are coaching your tester over and over again and everything is just going wrong and you're screaming inside. Or having like GoPro batteries just keep on dying and dying and trying to look professional while doing it. And like I said, things are to be learned. So I just want to say, continue to explore different options that are going to work for you. It's great to read books. Like, I love Lean UX, and I love to adopt some of his philosophies. But try to, like I said, learn what works for you, because 1 week sprints and testing alongside that just wasn't feasible for us. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out today and allow me to show you what we've done here at Rangle. And hopefully you learned something. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. So I want to open up the floor quickly to questions.
Thanks. I'm Tom Somerville. I really want to thank you. That was really interesting. Very good perspective on your journey in terms of UX. Question I had, you mentioned sprints and feasibility and clients. Another word that really crops up for me in this context is skills. I wonder if you could speak to how you found or developed skills on the Scrum teams that had the experience or the expertise to do the testing in a way that was valid.
So in the beginning, like I said, when we thought, like, how do we do this? We were incredibly scared, I'm not going to lie. Not a lot of us had done very formal testing, and it was just something that we just had to continuously research. I mean, you can read that stuff from a book, you can read it from articles, different forums, whatever your source may be. But when you're actually there, you start picking up on little things. Like I said, like general psychology on how what you're saying and maybe what you're doing could affect the results of the test. So to answer your question, everybody's kind of building up or leveling up just based off of completing these tests. So it's not about being the right level when you go in there. It's about by the time you come out, you're better than when you went in. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a designer. I think at one point you said that the client had concerns regarding the usability test, but it would be really cool if you could elaborate on what kind of concerns do clients have. Isn't this like necessarily a good thing that we're going to test out your product? And they have concerns, so what could those concerns be and why did they have them? That's pretty much it.
Okay, so I'm going to elaborate on one of our enterprise clients, for example. Their concern was that they didn't outright say it, but we could tell that their concern was releasing early. They feared the thought of showing a product to consumers or their users that wasn't finished. It's like they had to uphold some sort of, I guess, front for something. After we kind of disarmed that, we're just telling them that we're just testing, and this is actually going to actually better your product. But yeah, like I don't know why. I can understand that sometimes there's money riding on projects. Projects get expensive. You don't want to scare away consumers or users. But that was one of the biggest problems when we deal with clients and they don't want to test. It's that they just don't want to test and they don't want to release early. They think about it as releasing early. So they just don't want to show other people what they've been doing until it's in its final form. Milton.
That was very good, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
My question is similar to the one that was just asked about the scaring the customer. What about in this case? Were you doing usability tests on designs that you had designed, and did it scare you? And I mean, and to go one step further, do you think it is important perhaps to get someone else to do it? Are you going to skew are you liable to subtly influence people, you know what I mean, by not noticing the things that you maybe didn't notice when you were designing?
Well, that's a good point. In both cases, I've held usability tests for designs that were created for the team. And I've held tests where I've actually created designs. When I go in there, I make sure that I have a role. And that role being that I am completely unbiased. I'm not here to have an ego. And a facilitator should never have an ego when they're conducting a test. They should be there just for the success of their project. So that's the way I've approached it, is I go in there completely unbiased, and I don't worry whether my design is crap or not crap. It's just about actually having a successful product.
Thank you.
Could I just add one small thing to this?
Yeah, sure. And then a question there. If you want to
Okay,
ask something.
just one quick, which is, would it be better to have a third party do the test on your behalf? One, and then two, have you actually tried having a third party do the testing for you? And if that works or doesn't work, that's all.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Sorry, I have a cough. We've been thinking about having a third party do the test because I believe anybody can do the test. It doesn't need to be a designer. I think it's more of a team effort. We're having now we're having a test on Friday for our current project where we're bringing QA into the mix and allowing them to see, because BQA pretty much, they're kind of like designers in a way. They're looking out for the quality of the application. So it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't need to be a designer that actually holds the torch. It's more of a team effort. Like I said, get people involved, get developers involved, get other people involved that they can actually do it without you. And we've had projects where there hasn't been a designer resource. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to implement something like that, where we can have somebody else come in and do it, whether that be even outside of the project if they have the time, or whether it be somebody within the project who's not a designer. But at the present moment, it's only been designers, and now we're just kind of welcoming in other parties to come take notes and actually run a test here and there. Does that help? Yeah.
Hi, Dana, also designer. Thank you very much for your insight.
Thanks.
I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned the first test versus the second one and how it was more lightweight the second time. But you also mentioned it was more candid. Can you expand on like what you did exactly, or the little changes you did to make it feel more candid versus formal, aside from getting rid of the camera?
So candid, in the sense, I didn't actually hold that interview, but it was less about having cameras around. It was less about having more of like an actual structure. And it was more about conversation-based. So it's like, rather than handing them a bunch of scenario questions like, here, read this and perform a task, it was more like, so can you please go to the home screen? And it's more kind of guiding them in a way, but also allowing them to perform a task without us coaching.
Hi, I'm Raphael. So I lead Agile teams, and my question is, our process right now, it's a very user-driven approach. So they develop all their stories, they prioritize, etc. And at the end of our sprints, we provide a demo. And I'm curious to know, from your point of view, how much value are we leaving on the table by giving a demo versus a usability test, and how to think about that from a feasibility perspective. So our clients are physicians and nurses, so they're quite busy. So it's really hard to get them in a room. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So that's an interesting question. And that was one reason why it just wasn't feasible for us to do it within like a week, or maybe sometimes even 2 weeks. It's just like getting all that in for our end. Because as well as you, we actually have a demo at the end where we review what we've done for the clients, and it's an actual working piece of software. With that being said, and that's why I said bi-weekly and tri-weekly was working for us, we would actually go on our test, we'd show the client, okay, this is what we're testing today, and at the end of it, implement, and then at one of the demos that was right for us, we would show them, okay, this is what happened during our testing, and these are the recommendations we made. That would happen in the beginning, and then after, this is the solution that was implemented for those recommendations. It's all about what fits within, I guess, your sprint cycle.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I guess the question was like, what are you leaving on the table? And in my opinion, quite a bit. The demos are hugely important for the team and aligning with the clients about what you've built in that sprint, and is it going along the right path? Is there anything that needs to be adjusted? But the usability test goes to the user's goals and needs, whereas the demo is more about the business goals and needs. So those two together can be very powerful, but I think that's more to your question about what are you leaving on the table. There's so much subtle nuance that goes on when you watch someone use your application, and it is this kind of exhilarating and frightful kind of thing. But I've never seen one that's been conducted kind of poorly and asked the wrong questions not lead to some value for the team, even if it's just learning how to do it better next time. And I think that's what Daniel has learned through these forays into usability testing and kind of agile teams, is that you're never going to know it all right from the beginning. You're never going to be prepared enough. You're never going to have all the answers. And you can only learn by doing. And you're going to screw up, and you're going to learn, and you're going to get better. And you only do that by doing it. So, yeah, sorry, that I just wanted to add that because I'm passionate about demos as well.
Thanks, Mike.
So to kind of, sorry, my name is Adib Dinani. So to kind of bounce off of those two questions just now, I'm just curious, why wouldn't you just change your cadence to a 2-week or a 3-week cycle in order for you to be able to incorporate your user experience testing so that you can get that feedback loop on a regular basis so you're able to fix forward?
So it was more about like that's what we came to at the end, where we felt like that we were comfortable with that within that project, or receiving that feedback within that loop.
What held you to a 1-week sprint?
Have you ever read Lean UX?
I haven't.
So Lean UX pretty much, and it's a great book. I love it. But it basically says that, and our sprints are one cycle, and we thought that, well, we should just go out, do testing, and this is what Lean UX teaches. You go out one day, you pick one day, whether that be just before the demo or not. You test, you come back, and you implement. But we just felt like we couldn't do that, and it just wasn't feasible for us. And like I said before, I spent weeks just theorizing, like, is it even possible? Is that possible? Or in the beginning, I thought, like, oh, this is the way we do it. This is the way, because somebody wrote in a book and millions of people bought it, this is the way we should be doing it. But it's just not the case within different companies and with different projects.
Sorry, I can elaborate to it, kind of fill in that. So I think one of the reasons we do the 1-week sprints is it's easier to pivot from client feedback from that perspective. And one of the reasons it's very tough to do the usability tests in 1-week sprints, partly because you need some time to prepare, and then partly because if you might not have full flows to test within the 1-week sprint. So it's okay to do them, every 2 weeks. It gives you some time to kind of go back if you're using like a prototype to kind of develop the ideas you can't come out of the usability test. You can take that 1 week in between to build on the prototype, then test again, and then in the week after you kind of implement back into your sprint. So it gives a buffer for the clients to give feedback to make sure you're going in the right direction, and then also the buffer to be able to kind of
definitely
prepare.
I'll also add that given what we do here as consultants building products for clients, that might be very different than if you were on a product team and you could eventually get to a 1-week cadence around testing and building. Part of the struggle is that you have to convince clients to do this, right? Either show this thing early when it's really rough, be comfortable with people being confused by it, not even liking it, period. And that takes a lot of effort, and I think that's what Daniel kind of alluded to, that it's a constant struggle. I know even with the project he was successful at doing a tighter cadence around his sprints. When it actually came time to do it, the client tried to pull back, and it took another kind of session of convincing and explaining, this is what we're going to do and this is what we want to learn. So part of it is just the back and forth with managing the client. But Rich made a really good point about this idea of the team can still pivot really quickly on 1-week sprints, and a lot of it is just we've been doing 1-week sprints at Rangle, and that's just what we do. And the team is very comfortable working that way, but the client isn't always, right? And then the design aspect and usability testing is still fairly new to our process. So maybe we will get to 1-week sprints, and it'll be quite common at some point.
Sorry, my question just simply because I found with 1-week sprints there's a lot of ceremony involved, and you actually remove yourself from being able to develop, being able to test, being able to learn. So expanding that out and being able to move the ceremonies a little bit more towards the outskirts, and it gives you a little bit more of a product runway to be able to actually build something that you can get some feedback loops involved in it. And it also gives a little bit more breathing room and a few things, but it's more the team that would help to be able to determine that. And that's why I was wondering whether it was the client that was enforcing that sort of rule on you guys, or whether it was just a learning that you guys were going through to be able to determine whether that's the right approach or not. And so that's more or less the background of my question.
Okay.
I think Nick will probably hint at some of that in his talk. Right, Nick?
We patiently wait. Okay, so last question, then we'll take a quick 5-minute break and then hear Nick answer that question.
Thanks. One usability testing technique that is extremely lightweight and would probably also alleviate some of the concerns that clients have in terms of prematurely releasing real code would be paper prototyping. I was wondering if that was something you considered or tried to incorporate into your testing cycle.
So it's definitely something that we considered, but we moved so quickly that right when we start off, so I'm just going to call it sprint 0, we're already talking about what we're going to build, and we're just getting right in there right away. So, I mean, it just makes sense for us as a company to test actual live code. We have, with the lightweight version, I believe, like it was with some paper prototypes as well, right?
We use Envision on projects, so I mean, not quite paper prototyping, but not.
Markers on 8.5 by 11 sort of thing, that where you can sort of flip through alternatives really fast and just get that kind of super quick feedback.
Yeah. I feel like that's great. I mean, but to an extent, it's subjective in a way. I mean, I personally like running my tests where I know that the data that I'm getting, there's actual like successes and completions with what we're building. It's working alongside our actual product. But in the beginning, and we did it on this current project where there wasn't really much to test, so it was very much like that, where it was a prototype. And we did get a lot of good feedback on the little things, and that helped. So I definitely would do that in the future if we had the time.